We got that? Don't see the message yet.
Yep, that's your recording now.
Okay, excellent, thank you. We've effectively really just done apologies. We can note those apologies, Claire, and take them as read. Well, welcome everyone to this morning's meeting. I know it's been some time. It's really been 2 years. The 13th of June 2019 is when we last met. And clearly it's been quite a significant period of time. Unprecedented in many aspects of it for a variety of reasons, but obviously most particularly the pandemic that we've been working through. But I think that in itself has shown that that our community planning partnership has actually worked very well for us. It put us in a good position for much of the work that we will go on to look at today. In terms of managing that and getting through to where we currently are. We know that the pandemic is far from over yet, and we will have to look and find ways in many respects to live with it. But hopefully we are moving forward and are certainly in a much better place than we were at the outset. And that's really credit to all of you, for all of our partners across all of the organisations. Working very well together and doing what was necessary at very short notice in order to try and keep people as safe as we possibly could and to deal with the consequences that occurred because of the pandemic. So without much further, we will go on and obviously be discussing all of that as part and parcel of our annual report. I think that concludes our welcome and introduction. The minute of the previous meeting, which had been shared, I assume that there's nothing on there in relation to the agenda, and nothing on there that needs requirement a discussion that isn't already covered. Lorraine, I'm happy to bring you in.
Yeah, just absolutely appreciate this is from 2 years ago, so nobody's memory will be good enough in terms of that. But there's one item on there that we covered last time, isn't on the agenda this time, which is the report from the Chief Officer's Public Protection. Now, what we'll do is get a separate report sent round, if you can bear with us on that. It's separate reporting into community planning. But just to confirm that Chief Officer's Public Protection has been very, very active over the last year or two, making sure, given the circumstances, that we did everything possible as a partnership to protect our most vulnerable people. But what we will do, if you can just bear with us a little in that, we will get a report out to you just sent out separately, so we can cover that one off if everybody's okay with that.
Okay, everyone comfortable with that, and we'll get that sent to you separately. Okay, thank you. In that case then, we'll move on to item 4 of the agenda, and I'll hand over to yourself, Lorraine, to go over the annual report. I know we've all got that copy of it and we've got that on our screens at the moment, so happy to hand over to yourself to begin that process.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Buchanan. So there's a number of parts to the discussion this morning, and we're kicking off with the discussion on the annual review. So everybody's had the chance to see it. There's quite a lot of information in it, and I think the first thing to highlight is the fantastic partnership working over the last year. I know at our community planning meetings, officer meetings we've had during the year, the work has been absolutely brilliant. You know, it's really been community planning in action. I think everything everybody has been done is about communities and working together in partnership. So fantastic work over the last year and a half. I don't think anyone could criticise the partnership working because of the intensity of it. And daily, and every partner around the table has contributed to that to do the best for our residents. So rather than go through the report in detail, what we thought the first thing we would do was play a video, just giving a summary, a sort of accessible summary of community planning. We've got some very short case studies to bring it to light, and then we'll go into the discussion, which will be the most important part. But Claire, if you're able to play the video, first of all, it's very short.
Yeah, fingers crossed the technology allows us. So I'm going to press play, but what I'll also do is copy the link and put it in the chat just in case anyone isn't able to see it on the screen.
Thanks very much, Claire, and thanks for the team who put that together. I think it's a great summary, and what it does is makes it very accessible for the public, which is really important that people get a sense of what we've been doing over that time, and very much focusing a lot of the COVID activity. So that was just a quick overview. Now, really to bring it to life again, we've got some case studies. So the first is Ruth. Don't get Ruth's face on the screen yet, so she's there. Ruth, you were going to tell us a wee bit about the joint working that Voluntary Action have been involved in.
Hi, thanks, Lorraine. So I was going to have a chat about the Digital Inclusion Partnership, mainly because that's been one of the, it's part of the fairer plan. It's one of the big things that we all have to have a look at together in terms of how we ensure that digital inclusion is something that our most vulnerable communities are able to get access to. And throughout the pandemic, there's been quite a digital explosion, as we can tell from having the meeting online, and nearly every meeting that we've gone to has been online for the past wee while. So the Digital Inclusion Partnership has been a mix of both education, economic development departments from within the council, health and social care partnership, and a number of third sector organisations all working together to try and ensure that our most vulnerable communities have access to digital devices, but also have support to make sure that when they've got their device that they know what to do with it, as well as ensuring that they have access to Wi-Fi, whether that's through a portable Wi-Fi device or through the partnership we did with Barhead Housing, which was looking at making sure that we could cover some financial resources for our most vulnerable communities, whether that's supporting them to pay their bills or whether that was looking at getting them the best package that was available. So through Connecting Scotland, we're now entering into the third round of Connecting Scotland, which is a national programme supporting individuals to get devices. So our partnership, we've been working through all 3 rounds, and we've sent out Chromebooks, MiFi devices, as well as supporting our individuals through our digital champions, which is a volunteer programme where we have got local people who are digitally savvy, being able to support those who aren't really sure how to work the device that they've got. And believe me, there's quite a lot of us who don't know how to work the devices that we've got, including myself. Never known what a MiFi device was until we actually got involved in the digital champions. So we've supported a team of volunteers through the Digital Inclusion Partnership, both within council departments, health and social care departments, and other third sector organisations, as well as the team that we support in terms of doing the kind of ad hoc digital champion supports for individuals. And that's everything from showing somebody how to turn the machine on, to getting them connected, to getting an email address, as there are a number of people who haven't had an email address before, showing them how to do their online shopping, and making sure that they can do that as safely and securely as possible. And we will be continuing to work as a partnership across the digital supports, looking at inclusion as more than just the kit and the tech that you need to be able to get on, but as well as looking at how can we make sure that across East Renfrewshire we have free access to Wi-Fi, that people are able to pop in, whether that's a cafe, whether that's a community venue, whether that's working with culture and leisure in the libraries, to make sure that our communities know where they can go to get free access to Wi-Fi, and at the same time know that they can get access to support to help them get connected, whether that's to tell them what services are available or just to show them what button to press. And we'll be continuing to do that throughout the rest of this year. Happy to take any questions if anybody's got any.
Okay, thanks, Ruth. Well, we'll maybe do all the case studies and then take questions at the end if everybody's happy with that. If that's okay. And just to build on what Ruth was saying, I've been involved with my national hat on in terms of digital with SCVO in the launch of the programme. And I have to say that the feedback from councils and SCVO about Connecting Scotland has been what a fantastic programme it has been across Scotland, and just a partnership working has been great. And you know, in our own area it's been fantastic as well. It's been a really good programme that's got everybody working together, and SCVO have made, as the lead organisation, have been tremendous in working with us, and obviously very much Ruth in your role. It's like a very significant role, and an area that's really popular for our population. Thanks. First one, Claire, can I just double check with you what the second one is? Is it Jamie or is it Andy?
Me,
I think Andy's going to talk to the town
Andy
centre.
replacing Jamie in this one? Okay, Andy, over to you.
thanks very much. So building on Ruth's theme about joint working, this is slightly more about resilience and from a kind of economic development perspective. So businesses and town centres generally were really hard hit by COVID in so many different ways. Many of you have seen that yourself. Some businesses had to close and or change the way that they operated. And importantly, many residents, particularly at the start, had real concerns about their own safety in using businesses in high streets. So we set up 4 town and village recovery groups covering our key centres to provide support, but also to create resilience. And always in our mind at that time, given the complexity and all the regulations, was what if this ever happened again? So think about this from that context. So those groups, the 4 groups, are multi-agency groups involving a really wide range of partners: the BIDS, the Chamber of Commerce, police, businesses, local residents, voluntary action, community groups. It's been really wide, but there's been some great joint working through those groups. Regular meetings are held and they share information on the latest guidance, which is really important for businesses because you know yourself, you're professionals working in this area and it's hard enough to follow the guidance. So businesses had real difficulties in trying to interpret what was relevant for them and what wasn't. So through those groups, we were able to actually safely open the town centres, if I can use that phrase, because essentially they were locked down, and open businesses as well. And different group members delivered different actions. For example, voluntary action delivered some stuff. So many actions involved there, I couldn't even start to list them. We also, through those groups, developed a major shop local initiative that's gone down really well with local residents and with businesses. The groups, for me, have provided better joint understanding and have provided resilience, definitely. So regardless of COVID, we intend to continue with those groups due to the benefits that we've obtained through that multi-agency collaborative approach. And should, for example, another lockdown occur, we've built in resilience and much better prepared than we ever were when this started. So I'm happy to take any comments if you wish. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And again, if you're happy, just hold on for questions until we've had the third case study. So, Anthony, the Trust have been doing fundamentally different things from they've ever done before over the last year. So if you want to maybe tell us about that and all the work that's happened jointly with communities as well, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thanks, Lorraine. Obviously, the case study talks about the mass vaccination centre and highlights the kind of partners that were involved, everyone from the Army and the National Health Service to, I think, virtually every department in the council, the Trust, volunteers, voluntary organisations and individuals. And I suppose my first observation would be this has been typical of the response generally. I think people have come together determined to do their best, often doing things out of the ordinary in extraordinary circumstances. And I think we've seen that in everything that we've done, whether it's the emergency childcare provision or the holiday hubs or the partnership with health and social care and enrichment or support for schools or the mass testing unit or the mass vaccination centres. People have really been desperate to help and to be flexible. I think we saw when we first went into lockdowns, a lot of our staff were really keen to get back to doing something for their community, not necessarily to get out of the house, but to be doing something to help. And I think we've seen that's been reflected more generally in the huge expressions of interest in volunteering nationally, but also locally. Often they outstripped demand and our ability to utilise them, but I think it reflected people's commitment to their communities. Just before we went into lockdown, I went around all of the venues to speak to all the staff and tell them what was happening. And we were in Busby Library, which was dead, and there hadn't been anybody in for obvious reasons for about a day. And a little old lady came in, and she said, "I shouldn't be here. The doctors told me I have to stay at home. My daughters told me I have to stay at home, but I just wanted to come in and see how you are." This is to the librarian, because it's going to be a long time, and I don't want to leave it without saying goodbye. And we sometimes forget the level of connection and relationship that a lot of our colleagues have with their communities, and it runs both ways. And I think we've seen that during the last 18 months. It's easy to say that a crisis brings people together, but it can also bring out the best and the worst in people. But I think my observation would be where we've seen people frustrated or angry or upset, it's not been colleagues. Actually, it's brought out the best in our colleagues and partners. One of the consolations of the last 18 months has been seeing the way people have built new relationships, often with colleagues that they've known for years. But because, as you say, Lorraine, they're doing things out of the ordinary in extraordinary circumstances, they've built a deeper understanding and respect and partnership. And that's been really kind of heartwarming. I think the professionalism and the commitment is noticeable, but also the flexibility and the patience. And I would just observe that that's not the position that everybody's in. Speaking to colleagues throughout the country, not everybody has had the last 18 months of partnership working to the same degree that we have. And so I think we're in probably a better position coming out of this in terms of relationships, which are what's going to sustain us going forward, than we've ever been.
Thank you for that, Anthony, and absolutely appreciate those comments and think they're very accurate. Okay, so what we want to do now is maybe open up for a discussion and maybe pose 3 questions to you and play a wee bit of devil's advocate as well. So we've talked already about a lot of things that have gone well this year and lots of great examples of that. What could have gone better? Have a chat about that. And then what learning can we take from this? So this is pretty big questions as we lead into the way forward. And I suppose the devil's advocate question I've got is, if we look back 2 years to the community plan, have we achieved what we planned to set out? So we, for example, wanted to address loneliness. Now, we have in the last year had to really change, last 2 years, really change what we do and address the situation that was in front of us. But is this maybe the time just to reflect a bit about what those bigger aims were? And we have done some fantastic stuff to address loneliness, but have the levels of loneliness in our society gone up or down overall not because of our efforts, but because of the impact of coronavirus? So if we can maybe just start, I imagine the discussions will merge into each other in each of the questions. And if I can kick off with some of the things that I picked up from what's gone well this year. So the partnership working, the involvement, the volunteering, and the involvement of the community. And Anthony's bit about both ways in terms of our community being involved with all of us as public sector, and that real enthusiasm from the community to get involved. So if I can just open it up from your own perspectives and looking at the community plan, what has gone well in the last year and a half? I'm not too worried about timescales, and what could have been better and what learning is there? So happy to open it up. Big questions, I know, and first thing on a Monday morning. Ruth, I'll come back to you since nobody's volunteering. I'm going to come back to you to maybe you give a really good contribution, as did everybody. But what do you think? Can I ask you the one about what could have gone better in terms of our community plan as we've set out? Is that a difficult question?
Yeah, that is a difficult question.
From the perception of volunteers and communities in terms of the situation we were in.
So I would say in terms of from the volunteering perspective, I would say this is probably not a local issue, but rather a national issue in terms of the expectations of the whole Ready Scotland campaign. And as a network from the third sector interfaces, we've raised this with the Scottish Government in terms of, as Anthony said, we had there was a call went out for volunteers to come forward. There was a whole raft of people that put their name forward, but actually right at the very start of the pandemic, to be fair and to be honest, the idea was to keep people in, to keep people separate, and therefore having over 2,000 people come forward to say, I'm ready to volunteer. There was just no way we would be able to put that to be able to use all of them, or to find them an opportunity that they would be able to carry out safely and securely whilst continuing that. The flip side of that, what I would say though, is that I think we did manage locally very well to communicate the expectation and what was doable and what we were able to do within the confines of the first lockdown. And as we moved through that, I think that we learned quite quickly how to communicate at each stage in terms of what it is that we were looking for, what we could safely manage and how we could do that. And we did that as a partnership, not just so it wasn't just voluntary action that we're given the task of communicate what volunteers are. We actually all shared that as a partnership, which was very helpful and very useful. I would also say that I think one of the things that we could probably do in hindsight is ensuring that those that have been involved in the emergency response this time round are also involved in any future resilience planning, in terms of whether that's for winter flu viruses or whether that's for flash floods, or looking at an emergency position, ensuring that those that were able to and in a position to step forward and quickly change how they deliver their services are also involved in any future planning. Yeah. Thank you.
Really good points. That one about, we did have this massive volunteers, 2,000 is a fantastic number, but then because of the restrictions, we couldn't use all those volunteers. So I think the learning from that going forward is there's lots of people in our community ready to be involved. So how can we build on that and get them involved and keep them involved there? So really good points. Okay, it's given people a wee bit, putting Ruth on the spot, it's given everybody else a bit of a chance. Okay, David. David is just new in his role. David, do you want to explain your new role as well, and then your question? That would be great.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Mccarry. I'm the temporary area commander for East Renfrewshire, and Inverclyde. Although I have been in the area since about 2008, on and off, and held some national roles as well. But I was recently, a couple of months ago, made the area commander. So I'm a East Renfrewshire resident, born and bred. So my mum still stays in Orchard Park. So it's an area that's very close to my heart. And I suppose, just from a fire and rescue perspective, obviously it was a challenging time for everybody, and quite rightly so. When lockdown happened, we went to very much a response posture and protected the crews within the stations, and made sure that we got COVID security across all of our properties so that we could maintain that operational response. However, although we did some good partnership work within East Renfrewshire, I think in general terms, the amount of community requests that came into fire and rescue were probably limited, to be perfectly honest. And I suppose looking forward from a fire and rescue perspective, particularly around the community plan, is how residents and partners view the fire and rescue service and how we can support them. If you look in the community plan, it will obviously talk about accidental dwelling fires, but hopefully moving forward we can align ourselves a bit more with some of the other outcomes within the plan. You know, looking at older people, looking at isolation, and really utilising our staff to ask further questions when we have that engagement with people about general well-being, about how they are feeling in their home environment, and hopefully then point them to other partners. And Andrew had mentioned there about business safety and that return to some sort of normality for them, and that look forward to see if this was to happen again. And I suppose that's an area of these sort of business safety groups that fire and rescue could assist with, because when you look at the built environment, a lot of the fabric of the building was changed in response to COVID, and that then potentially in some of the larger supermarkets, etc., you know, meant that the way in which that building would perform in the event of a fire would change, the way in which people would evacuate with one-way systems would change. So it's an area where we can deploy our protection officers to provide advice and guidance with in relation to that. And obviously, post-COVID, you're potentially going to have a lot of workplaces who have got new members of staff, you know, different members of staff that are maybe trying a new industry, for example. So it's important that we can provide a level of support at that stage of the proceeding as well. But I think really, ideally for me, the longer term view for my view for fire and rescue is to show the communities and partners how we can assist them, how we can be their eyes and ears and be those community connectors that can assist people, not just going and doing our home fire safety visit or a safe and well check, but actually open up avenues for other people and connecting them to other partners, and making sure those referral pathways are absolutely spot on. Thanks.
Thanks, that's a good point. So, point about involving all the organisations as much as possible in building and that. And if I remember, fire and rescue did some, if I've got this right, did food parcels and things like that. Yeah, we're out delivering parcels.
That was a community action team.
Community action team right at the heart of what was needed when the emergency at the beginning was at its worst, and we're really worried about people who are isolated, not getting access to food. So fantastic work there. James, your turn now.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think from our perspective, what you've shown us is demonstrating the strength of the partnership as Anthony's described, and I think, you know, it's important to reflect on your ability to respond in circumstances like this through the great foundations that have been built through this partnership. So it's important to recognise that. I don't know about the question about what could have gone better. When you're in a circumstance like this, I guess we just react and prioritise. But I think what's important is that the priorities have been identified as the ones that were most critical at a point in time for the community. And you can see that the impact that that's had on people's lives, in particular around the move to digitalisation, as Ruth's described, and the responsiveness of additional investment in securing support for businesses and individuals in the community. There's a couple of things, I guess, for me. The volunteering one is quite an important one, actually, and I'm hearing this from lots of different environments, that it's a key feature of, I guess, community involvement, but the challenges of getting people involved at pace and scale were really felt across the country. So it's maybe a learning from the future about how do you retain volunteering as a key aspect of community involvement. And I guess harness the motivation of people coming out of a pandemic situation, and how they continue to do that with restrictions easing and greater opportunity for them to be involved. And the digitisation of the workforce and the population was something that we knew was coming, and it probably happened faster than before. So I guess a kind of digital strategy or ambition is something to consider about how we go forward and maximise on Connecting Scotland and other programmes, the Digital Start Fund, for example. How does that become a key priority under any revised plans? And then the last thing for me, there's a comment in one of the reports which talks about how we do services differently in the future, or how we respond differently in the future. And I think the involvement of respondents and I guess sharing what they felt were the barriers and responding in that agile way. But we had the ability to do that as a partnership. So how do you harness it in a post-pandemic situation? And that we don't, I guess, the danger is that we all default back to normal. And I don't just mean that for this partnership, I mean everywhere, that we all go back to face-to-face and we all go back to our offices. How do we retain the best of what we got in that circumstance? Thank you.
That's brilliant. Some really good points there. So some taking the learning take forward is some of that, how we keep the digitisation going forward, and then that involvement of people and respondents, how we keep that energy going that we had. Because I think we'd have to say some of our officer meetings about community planning were actually the best and liveliest we've had at a time of real challenge for everybody and real sadness across the community. But actually the meetings were just so full of energy. So how do we keep that going? It's really important. Okay, Julie next, and then followed by Anthony.
Just a brief comment about going forward. I'm assuming, and I'm sure that this is the case, that we've got a record of all the people who put their hands up. And it's because actually, some of the work that this isn't over, and the legacy is going to be significant in terms of the people we support. They are frailer, they haven't been out. Recovery is going to take quite a long time, and we think, if we could try and harness some of the resources in neighbourhoods, localities, and including volunteers in terms of thinking about more preventive, proactive work, then that's something we would really want to do. And it would be great if we could connect the people who volunteered plus some of the organisations and put a sort of call out in terms of helping your neighbourhood renew. I think that would be something worth doing.
So that's really good in terms of keeping a good idea, but going forward, keeping everybody involved. It also reminds me of we were doing some work in civil contingencies through some of the community councils. It was a few years ago, and it was actually about members of the community in an emergency, about actively getting involved. Now, I think at the time we were thinking of slightly smaller scale emergencies, perhaps maybe flooding or something, but the community have done that in a big scale. But how do we keep that going and make sure all those people were interested? So thanks, Anthony.
Yeah, just in terms of maybe things that we could have done better, and I don't think this is a reflection on anything that we as a group or as partners did wrong, but I think one of the responses to this from both the UK and the Scottish Government was to identify or to hear about problems and then throw money at the problem. And I think we struggled at times to manage that effectively and efficiently. Maybe this is something Louise can, I'm not looking to throw you under the bus, but maybe you can speak about a bit more. But I think even from our point of view, we knew that whether it was welfare or mental health or isolation were issues, but sometimes the need and the understanding of the need at a local level didn't match the way that the money and the support was coming from the government and some of the criteria around it. I just think most latterly, for example, there was a Get Into Summer campaign, which was to get kids active over the summer, recognising the fact that they hadn't been. And they asked us to work with school children to plan how that would be used. And we had to point out that the schools had already broken up. And you just think you can't. Then they said, well, use it to recruit staff. And we had to say, well, that'll take 4 to 6 weeks best will in the world. So there was a kind of not a very good understanding of what the challenges were and what would be the most helpful form of help. And I think that's probably something that we as a group should be taking forward and working on nationally to make sure that there's a better understanding of what the most effective forms of assistance would be and how they could be best passed to the partners and then on to the communities, because obviously people don't want to turn down sums of money, but you don't want to be spending it like sailors on leave just in order to use it. And I think that's possibly one of the things I would kind of observe.
Okay, so to work to do lessons learned nationally as well as locally. And I think everybody has, this is something that none of us have experienced before, so there will be lots of learning nationally and locally for us. So Tony, then Louise. Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. I think it's great to hear a lot of the comments that have been made, and in particular the examples that we got at the beginning really of the discussion. But I think some of the points I was going to make, Anthony had just raised some of them there. It's all well and good making resource available, but there has to be a much better bottom-up approach in order to tackle that resource. In order to tackle the problems, we need to know that the resource is available, but we also need the ability to be able to utilise it in the best possible manner. And I think some of the things that we've seen around community wealth building and those things that we talked about for a long time, but in some instances were very difficult to actually grasp and do, primarily because a lot of the resource wasn't necessarily there to take them forward. We have to now be saying that these are important ways of moving forward. And Julie touched on it as well. We know that there have been a lot of lessons learned. We know that there are a lot of positives, as we've heard this morning, that we can take from it. But we need the ability to be able to harness those positives and make sure that going forward, that it's not just about dealing with COVID or the pandemic or a future issue where we need that resilience, but it's about making things better generally in order to put us in a much better place. We know that people going back to work are going to be anxious. We know that people just going back out shopping again are going to be somewhat anxious. And it's how we start to tackle those areas about their personal well-being and how we manage it. The well-being of those going back to work, do we do it on a hybrid basis, as is the likely outcome? But that's also about recognising that people's own priorities and well-being may also have changed as well, that people may have realised how fragile life can be, if you like, with the difficulties that they have faced, and how taking some of those issues for granted perhaps may well change for some people. So we need to be able to move forward, taking all of that into account, looking at the new ways of working, looking at the support levels that we need to encourage that and to help everyone moving forward, and hopefully to deal with some of the anxiety pressures that we know currently exist and will continue to exist moving forward, and those fear factors. We know that there are still big challenges ahead, whether that be the furlough ending and some of the bigger financial support to businesses, etc., all stopping, is going to create issues, whether it be unemployment, whether it be businesses failing. We need to have things in place that we can manage that going forward, because despite having resource available or thrown at things, as had been mentioned, it's not necessarily going to fix everything going forward, and we need to be able to tackle that the best way we can and continue that pressure, I think, up the line to say that there still has to be support, whether that be through the benefit system, whether it be through some form of furlough. There needs to be some support built in that we can still take things back to a level where we can have people comfortable and start to working towards the new ways that we're going to look at life. Because this isn't just going to be locally within our communities, although that's going to be our priority, our starting point. This is a global issue, and we will see the impacts of it, as Julie said, for a long time to come, and it will be with us. And it's how we manage to live in that new environment and deal with some of the pressures that it brings. but I think we've clearly got a lot of very good learning, and we do need to move forward. But I suppose it's saying it's not going to be easy, but we have perhaps a better idea of the tools available to us to try and fix some of those issues that perhaps we didn't pay enough attention to in the past. Thanks.
Thanks, Tony. And I think an important point to capture about that people will have changed. We've all changed. Many of us are maybe more anxious than we were, or concerned, or so people's perceptions. So what I was just thinking from what you were saying, some of the consultations we've done in the past, people may actually be given a different response now. Their priorities might be different. So I think that's important for all public sector organisations to think about. We shouldn't rely on a consultation we did a few years ago, and there could be changes. So Louise, then Ruth, and then I'll maybe bring this bit of the discussion to a conclusion. Okay, so Louise first, then Ruth.
Thanks, Lorraine. So just to build a wee bit more on what Anthony and Councillor Buchanan have said, I think we saw lots of different funds coming out across the council and across different agencies as the Scottish Government tried to support. We ourselves were in charge of the humanitarian funds, and I think that was various different funding streams that came out with various different bits of criteria, various types of reporting. And what we worked with Voluntary Action and other partners really well to try to do our best in a practical way, with food and prescriptions and winter clothing and hardship payments for people. But it became clear that while we need to keep a proportion of those funds for whatever kind of response we need to think about how to build back stronger and how to use those funds for something that would mean something in the longer term to our communities. And I think that's proved a bit of a challenge for us. We're finding in discussions with Ruth and colleagues that some of the groups aren't ready for that conversation yet. They're just coming out of lockdown, starting to go back a wee bit to normal. They don't quite know what they need yet and what they will need. So and our funding unfortunately only goes till the end of March, and we have no outlook beyond that. So we're having discussions just now about how to learn a bit more about that. And we've commissioned a piece of research which will tell us a bit about what this has meant for communities and what they're starting to think in terms of building back. And we're hopeful that we can then run a community bid process with some of the funding that will give some of our groups and third sector in the area some funds that will help get them back on their feet and bring them back to the table at the beginning of the year. And I think there probably are different people that we want to try and engage with there beyond the people that we would have known before. We have built up relationships with some of our high-risk individuals, shielding people that we probably didn't have relationships with before. And we have seen people who are coming for help for our teams that maybe have been in a slightly precarious financial position. They thought they were doing fine until this hit, and now they're looking for help in a way that they weren't before. So I think it's on us to try to think about how we can use those funds to support in the longer term, but without having that long-term headroom ourselves in terms of when that funding will be available to. Thanks.
Thanks, Louise. So some direction there and going forward, but also reflecting on the fact that one of the things we have learned is about a wider vulnerable group that we may not have known about before. Some groups that weren't visible to the public sector now are, who need support, and groups whose support needs have got more due to coronavirus and the pressures. Ruth.
Thanks. I was really just going to, part of what I was saying, Louise has kind of covered, so I'll make it kind of quick. I was just going to come back to the point that Julie was making, and the short answer is yes, we have a list of all the people that came forward. I have spreadsheets coming out of my ears with contact details of people that have come in from various different ways, whether that's directly to the community hub or through the Ready Scotland portal. We were given updated spreadsheets from the national portal on a weekly basis. So we have all of their contact details, and we have tried as much as possible to keep in touch with those that we haven't used. So obviously those that we've managed to either match up with an opportunity or who are volunteering for us, we are in regular contact with, but there is a lot of individuals who put their hand up and said, yes, I am really interested in coming forward, and then didn't progress through to actually giving any more detail about what they were actually interested in doing. So we've got quite a piece of work around trying to understand exactly what was their initial interest, why did they initially put their name forward, and trying to understand how we could get them more fully involved. But we are looking to make sure that we can try and capitalise that. But I think one of the things that we need to learn from this is trying to be both flexible and quite clear in what we're communicating to those that are interested in coming forward. And that includes groups as well as people that are interested in volunteering. So it's not just about saying what are you interested in and what are your needs. It's also about asking them, what are your skills? Where do you currently work? What are you currently looking at? Because that might not necessarily be an opportunity that we've currently got live, but actually it might be something that further down the line, as things open up, as more people come out and start moving about, that we start to see different problems or different challenges emerging that we're not actually aware of yet. And it's just trying to make sure that we're as flexible as we possibly can be. And the difficulty with having, you know, national resource that comes down, whether that's Scottish Government resource or UK resource that comes in that has an end of the financial year attached to it when we are not quite ready yet. And this is not just going to be one financial year. I think as a partnership, we can be quite vocal in sending that message back, and we certainly are as a TSI network.
Thanks for that, Ruth. And I think the end of the year has been an issue for all of us. Obviously, we all work in financial years, but coronavirus has unfortunately spanned more financial years than we ever thought it was likely to. And the impact of it will go on for many years. So thank you very much for that. If I can bring that to a conclusion, I think there's been a very rich discussion, and hopefully Claire and the team will be able to capture that into some key points.
Hello.
So, Gordon, would you like to come in?
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, no, I can't go away without passing. Sorry, I couldn't get a video connection there, so I'm on the phone. Everything that we've been talking about here, at the core of it, has been our care resource. They've been fundamentally one of the principal reasons or explanations as to how well we've managed to cope and the resilience that we have had locally. Can you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's not very clear, Gordon, but I think we're capturing it. Okay.
And I think the biggest threat we have going forward is that this care resource that we have had, it's taken years to get here. We've managed to break down silos the silo thinking between the departments. They're all working together. And I think the last 18 months has shown how well that has come together and what we've managed to achieve. What I'm trying to say here and get at, and I think you know this already, is the threat that the proposed centralisation of social care, the effect that would have on how well we could have coped with this pandemic. The local knowledge, the sharing of that local knowledge has been absolutely key. And each department has expressed that so well in the various presentations. I would I would insist on behalf of the residents of East Renfrewshire that you, Lorraine, as Chief Executive, and Tony, you as leader of the council, do everything you possibly can to make sure that centralisation of adult and the younger care, the social care facility, is not centralised. It must remain local, or else we would not have managed to achieve anything like what we've managed to achieve here. I've said my piece. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. And there'll be some information coming up to a council, because we have to respond to the consultation on that. But I know there's been a strong COSLA position taken on the importance of adult social care and children's social care and its integration into the work of councils. So that would be something that, as a council, we'll get the opportunity to respond to. There, Tony, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, just to come in, to assure Gordon that, we will be taking that forward. There was a COSLA response, Gordon, on Friday, and the initial part of that response is that we've asked for an extension to the consultation period to ensure that as many bodies as possible have sufficient time in order to draw up their thoughts in relation to the consultation. So hopefully that will be accepted. That's been the first part, I think, that we all wanted to achieve. was to ensure that there was sufficient time frame for that consultation, and that everyone involved, across not just ourselves as a council or COSLA, but that all organisations have the opportunity that are involved, as our partners are today, in responding to that, to feedback that information. So yeah, that process has started, and like yourself, Gordon, I equally have some concerns, significant concerns in relation to that, but we are taking that forward, and I'm sure that everyone will put forward what their thoughts are and their proposals as to how they would like to see the care service be. But clearly, close working has been intrinsic in getting us through the last 18 months. And I think that does have to be highlighted, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. And we can capture the learning about that work across and the support for the care services during this as part of the learning. So thanks for that, Gordon. Gordon, just because I can't see a hand to put up, so please just cough loudly or shout if you want in, and I'll bring you in. Or I know Tony and others, because my bit for facilitating is just about to finish. So thank you for that. Lots of good information there we'll capture. And as you know, the agenda is structured in a look back. Tony will go on to introduce where we are now, the transition plans, and then a look forward. So there's plenty of opportunity to contribute as we move forward. Tony, back to you to introduce
okay.
Agenda item 5.
Yeah, no, I will do it. Thanks, Lorraine. Just briefly, just before we move on, can I just ensure that we've been asked to approve the annual report, and obviously the discussion that we've just had, I presume that we're happy to do that. Indications appear positive. Thank you. Moving on then to item 5 on our agenda, where we are now, and as much as the recent discussion that we've just had touched on some of that, we can look at it a bit more in depth. The Fairer East Rend plans have been updated for 2021-2022 to consider our response, albeit the pandemic is still going on, but hopefully we are in a better position than we were at the start of it. But clearly, as we've seen from the last few days, the virus is still very much with us. People are still falling ill with it. Hopefully, the numbers falling seriously ill and indeed dying from it have significantly gone down, and hopefully that continues. But clearly, it's something that we do have to keep a very careful watch on, and it can change almost daily. But happy to hand over to Claire now, I think is going to come in and lead this next section. Claire, over to you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yep. So as Councillor Buchanan has mentioned, and we've been discussing that there are so many unknowns at this time, and looking forward, we're still in a position where we're not quite clear where things are. In terms of where we are just now, so we have as a reminder, we've got our local outcome improvement plan, which we refer to as Fairer East Rend, and it has 5 priority outcomes, and it's the 5 priority outcomes are about looking at reducing inequality across our local authority. Now, they were due we set them as a 3-year plan, and they were due for renewal last year, but given the situation and the unknowns that we've spoken about, we made a decision that we would do an interim transitional plan for 1 year. So the Fairer East Rend plans, which have been shared in your papers and that you will have seen, they'll look broadly similar to what you have seen in the past and how they had looked for the previous 3 years, but they've been tweaked ever so slightly. So there are some new activities and some new information on there around how we want to manage this slightly differently in the transition year. Now, we're going to have a bit of a chat, hopefully now, about how they reflect the current position, and then we'll be able to go on to planning for the future, and Jamie will talk to us in the next section about where we go next. But I would ask really just for everyone to consider the current Fairer East Rend plans. I'll bring them up on the screen to see again. So we've got 5 current outcomes. The first one is that child poverty in East Renfrewshire is reduced. As we know, and as we've spoken about already, we've seen poverty. Those who were experiencing poverty before the pandemic are likely to have seen this increased. Those who were just about managing previously have perhaps fallen into poverty as a result of the pandemic. So we've had to look at, as our cohort of our child poverty rate has remained static at the moment, but there's a bit of a data lag. So potentially we might see some increases in child poverty going forward. So we've had to think about the actions we take under that and try to address some different activities. We've also got residents of East Renfrewshire have the right skills, learning opportunities and confidence to secure and sustain work. And as we know, we've spoken about the economic impact. We've seen huge changes in our economic situation. We've seen lots of newly unemployed residents. We've seen changes in our businesses, new and existing businesses and how they've developed. And we've got to think about all of that in the context of what happens to those who are already needing support under this Fairer East Wren outcome. So long-term unemployed, for example, competing now against the newly unemployed, and what does that picture look like? Thinking about the businesses that we can support people where there are employment opportunities and where there are business opportunities. Also, in reference to things like the living wage. So we've been looking very much at work around how do we support employers to become accredited living wage employers. How realistic is that in the current climate and the situation of businesses sort of trying to build back? We've also got an outcome around transport links being accessible, attractive and seamless. And again, in the last 18 months, we have seen huge changes in our transport situation, reliance on support from volunteers and community transport, while some of the public transport has been less open. But as that becomes more accessible and opened up again, how does that look going forward? We've spoken already this morning about mental health and wellbeing, and that's a huge impact. We've seen services being delivered in a different way, people feeling more isolated, relying on support. I think Julie touched before about those who were already struggling in terms of health and well-being, perhaps have seen that more challenged over this time. And safety and social connection has changed again. Safety is no longer just around the falls in the home or the fire safety that we might have looked at in the past. There's a safety in terms of going into businesses and a feeling of safety, a perception of safety, and that has changed over the time. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at the papers in advance, and I'd really just like to open out then to a discussion again to say, do the current plans, the transition plans that we have, and these 5 outcomes, how do they reflect the balance between response, recovery and renewal from the impact of the pandemic? Just open that out, please. Caroline?
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, just building on what you're saying in terms of the child poverty work that we've been doing, and Claire, we've been working very closely with you on the working group, and we brought the Child Poverty Action Report up through the approval processes back in June. So we were able to sort of report on, a lot of good measures and initiatives that took place during the pandemic, and we've heard a lot about them already in the previous item around the humanitarian support and the support for connectivity and for families. So I think the Child Poverty Report was able to give a lot of insight into what we've been able to do during the period of restrictions and the support for parents and families that we provided. But I think it's fair to say that we recognised that a lot of our work was quite reactive and had to be quite reactive as a result of some of the government fundings that we're hearing, some of the needs of our residents, and coping with the restrictions and the impact on our residents. So we spent some time recently starting to just try to step back a wee bit from that picture and to look forward as to how we could become a bit more strategic, and were there strategic changes that maybe would benefit in the longer term for our families and children experiencing poverty. And although Claire says the levels appear to be holding, we do think there is a lag there, and we think, as the leader has said already, you know, in furlough and schemes like that end, I think we will start to see more of the true impacts of this. So we wanted to be able to take a wee bit of time to look at some of the more strategic changes that we could maybe consider, potentially around things like fuel poverty, access to housing, affordability of housing, cost of the school day. Some really good work going on now in our schools to do an audit of the cost of the school day, and to try and actually understand and to take some time and be able to get some really good data around that. So I guess it was to reassure the board that whilst we've had to be reactive, we're starting now to really try and look more strategically at, are there levers there that we can start as a partnership, whether it's council services or whether some of our other partners, that between us we can help to lever and amend and adapt some of these policies. But I guess I probably don't need to say that usually where policy change is required, it usually then has got resource implications, and that is always is the context that we're operating in. But the group is very much focused on that, and we're going to continue our deliberations on that over the next 6 months. So hopefully you'll start to see some of that coming through in relation to our child poverty work.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I think that that's an important point, that, you know, we're asking about the balance here in our plans in relation to response, recovery and renewal, but actually still so much of it is response at the moment. But it's good to know that, you know, there's that kind of thought ahead to the recovery and the renewal side as well, and that strategic vision. So thank you. Lorraine?
Thanks, Claire. I guess looking at the 5 of the themes that we're looking at for this transition year that we're in at the moment, one I think is going to be absolutely crucial, both response, recovery and renewal, will be mental health and wellbeing. I think we always knew that mental health was an area that across Scotland and in our society that we need to focus on, but given the impact of lockdowns and people, I think as yet we don't know what the impact on mental health in our society is going to be. Everything I've read has suggested that we will in the next few months start to see more and more mental health issues, be it from young people who've had quite a different life than they would expect, our most vulnerable shielders, and older people who've maybe been in their house and are perhaps lonely and it's affected their mental health. So for me, that's an area I think this year I think we all need to focus on. And it's not just mental health in terms of the most severe cases. It may be the HSCP. It will be about prevention work and how I think as a nation and how as a society we can all improve our mental health. So to me, that's something that will cut across response, recovery and renewal, but maybe even more important than when these outcomes were developed in the first place.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. I think you're right in terms of the mental health and well-being. There's almost a, you know, that juggling priorities here of sort of trying to re-establish community supports and that kind of softer side of engagement and community connectedness, which I'm sure voluntary action are very aware of, but trying to sort of re-establish that whilst also managing the additional demand, which Julie, you'll be well aware of, you know, additional demand on frontline services, and also trying to develop some of the broader supports around the sort of the digital inclusion and getting people online and connected in a different way to before. So it's that lots of different pieces to the puzzle that we all need to play our part in there. Julie?
It was just to reflect on some of the work that we did with colleagues in education and with CAMS around developing, and Siobhan and Mark will be well aware of this, the Healthier Minds team approach, where we really brought together folk from a range of sectors, including the third sector, into a sort of a team, a digital team, and actually how that work has been very successful but it's also helped us work on pathways from GPs and from CAMs to make sure that when we get referrals, they go to the right place and we can do preventive work rather than necessarily looking at this up the tier in terms of complexity of need. And I just think that's been a real success. And I think something that we should learn from and build on. And maybe we thought of it as a transitional piece of work or interim piece of work, but I think, you know, we're considering whether that's something that needs to remain at least for the next year or so.
Thanks, Julie. I've crossed paths with some of the Healthier Mind stuff, and there's some great work going on, and I wonder if there's something there to be. Obviously the focus there is with children and young people, but are there lessons to be learned, or are there opportunities to replicate that with adults also?
Well, yes, Claire. I mean, and there's additional funding coming in, but again, it's quite. We'll need to see there's additional funding coming in for primary care mental health, and looking at it in neighbourhoods. There's some real opportunities there, provided it's not too prescriptive. And if we get some flexibility in terms of how we can design something that works for East Renfrewshire, I think that would be really helpful. But there are opportunities to do that. And actually, although clearly there are some issues around the governance around the National Care Service, some of the direction of travel in terms of prevention and well-being, you know, are to be lauded. So I think there will be some work starting around really looking at good neighbourhoods and how neighbourhoods can help prevent poor mental health and create well-being. So I think there will be financial opportunities, but as long as we get a bit of flexibility in what we design.
Thanks, Julie. And Wendy, I'm not sure if your voice as a Scottish Government could feed that back, but the flexibility around funding seems to have been mentioned a few times, so that would be useful there. Thank you. Stephen?
Hiya, I'm going to keep my camera off just because when I switch my camera on, I get the blue screen of death on my laptop, and so I keep getting only in Teams, it has to be said. EIS are looking, our IT guys are looking at it for me. I suppose my point was about, Julie, you mentioned, sorry Claire, you mentioned that you know, how realistic is it to look at living wage jobs as we kind of build back. And I suppose within SE, our ambition is that we build back better, if I was to use a specific phrase. So we're certainly, as a national organisation, we're keeping our focus on more good jobs, again, for want of a better phrase. So that's really our focus moving ahead. We're not too concerned about you know, a question of how realistic is it. It is the ambition nationally for Scotland that we almost everyone is a living wage employer. So it's definitely worth keeping that there. And focusing on it. It's going to be difficult. Nobody's saying it's not, but then I suppose that's what challenges are for, isn't it? So yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
No, that's useful. Thanks, Stephen. And you're absolutely right. It's where we should be. You know, we need to be putting those challenges forward and aiming towards that aspiration. We've had some discussions recently around, you know, going beyond ourselves as a living wage employer and thinking about our procurement processes as well. You know, we want to go that step beyond just what we're doing, but it's looking at those smaller organisations or businesses that we're procuring services as well and what they offer. Thanks for that, Stephen. Mark?
Thanks, Claire. Maybe just a couple of observations. One, picking up on Lorraine's point, I think the area around the sort of mental well-being is sort of the sort of interconnected nature of that, I suppose, of some of the other outcomes we're trying to take forward. I'm thinking really, you know, of that being crucial in terms of the second outcome we've got around residents having the right skills, learning opportunities and confidence. And if we don't get that mental health and physical well-being right, then that impacts massively on us delivering the indicators we've set out there. And I suppose also just looking at that second one, particularly thinking about the earlier discussion and we were reflecting on the sort of partnership approach and the effective use of data. And I think going forward, that close working relationship we've got with throughout the partnership, I think particularly the council and SDS, but also working with the trust to make sure that we deliver those things. I think that sort of, whether you want to think of it as sort of recovery, response, or renewal, they all again are interconnected in that sense. But I think going forward, that partnership and delivering that for the sort of young people and the residents of East Renfrewshire.
Yeah. Thanks for that one, Mark. I wonder if I can just probe a little bit. We haven't really spoken so much around the feeling of safety in the community. So I wonder if I can perhaps ask our Police Scotland, I think, Michelle, you're maybe still in the call, and also our colleagues from Fire and Rescue, some of the stuff around that feeling of safety in the home and people perhaps spending more time in their homes and perhaps being more vulnerable to some of the, you know, falls at home or domestic abuse. Also that feeling of safety out in the community, where safety changes now in terms of seeing large groups and people and what the COVID rules have been and unsure about what they are in the future. And I just wondered if you feel that the plans strongly enough reflect the feeling of safety both in and out with the home. Any thoughts from that from Police Scotland or Fire and Rescue?
Hi, morning, it's Michelle here. So the two superintendents, Superintendent Gary Jansen and Detective Superintendent Donna Duffy, have been on the call as well, just to know that they spoke at length last week about the public health approach and incorporating that into any kind of plans around our sort of key priorities, adult mental health, poverty, and sort of drug deaths, etc. So from my own perspective as the Communities Inspector within East Renfrewshire, we've been working closely with yourselves and the youth workers around sort of the youth disorder that we've seen, and we've kind of set up daily, weekly and daily meetings to see how we can target that, and that's working with British Transport Police. So it's been very much a joint approach, and it's incorporated under the Safer East Ren plan, and it's been fairly successful. We haven't seen the significant disorder that we saw in February, March time. So that's just a continuation into the coming up to the end of the summer, and we hope to take that forward as well into next year. So the campus officers as well within the schools, they bring a lot to the table, and they're working closely with all head teachers, sort of pushing that message around sort of antisocial behaviour, whilst kids and etc. are out and about in open spaces, working with the Fire and Rescue Service around some of the things that we're seeing around fires in schools and open areas, etc. So it really is a sort of ongoing work. In relation to safety within the home, domestic abuse, I don't have any kind of facts or figures, but we do link in with partners when we attend domestic incidents and kind of signpost the most vulnerable to agencies that will help them. We're also pushing the Herbert protocol for missing persons that we're seeing, sort of the older population with any kind of dementia, Alzheimer's, and really kind of pushing that message through social media and informing families when the officers go there about the Herbert protocol and the things that we can do that make it a wee bit easier if anybody does go missing to kind of get that person back safe and well within quite a quick turnaround. So it's very much an ongoing work in progress, and having been new to this role for about 6 to 7 months, it's just building in those relationships that were already there and also reaching out to others to work together. So at this point, I don't know whether any of my bosses wanted to come in with anything, but I know that Superintendent Jansen had another important meeting at 11, so I don't know if he's still on.
No. I think he had to drop off actually. Donna, did you want to come? Sorry.
Yeah, hi there. So I'm Donna Duffy. I'm the Detective Superintendent in Glasgow Division with the portfolio for public protection. So our Divisional Commander, Mark Sutherland, him, myself and Gary Jansen are kind of strategic leads for our kind of public health approach. Now, we had commenced this within Glasgow City Council. It's early stages. However, we had done a presentation to Lorraine and some of the team just last week around our kind of focus on public health and maybe how potentially for yourselves in community planning, how we could tie in some of those pieces of work. Now, interestingly, obviously a lot of the conversation so far today has been around adult mental health, which is one of our key priorities in our public health approach. And that's for us to make sure that, because you know, what we have seen over the whole period of the pandemic is we have seen an increase in concern forms for adults. And that's been for a number of reasons, whether it's down to mental health issues, loneliness, addiction issues, it's right across the board, but we've seen a significant increase in that. So coming out of the pandemic and looking at the kind of public health approach, we're looking at, well, how do we, you know, as an agency, how do we respond to these individuals and how do we make sure that we get them the help that they need rather than coming to the police? Because we're not necessarily the people that these, you know, when they're in a time of crisis that they need. So we're trying to tackle that kind of revolving door, if you like, of the same people that come through all our systems. And by looking at the underlying issues and whether that is through addiction, whether it's through poverty, etc., we are hoping that through the public health approach that we can link in with the correct agency and support these people as best we can. So our kind of main focuses for us is, as I say, the mental health aspect. We're looking at the whole drug deaths issue as well. We're also looking at poverty and gambling and how that affects people's mental health. And as you've already mentioned about your focus on poverty as well. And they are the kind of key things which I think, you know, from the discussions that you've had already today could fit in well with our public health approach. And I suppose what we are asking the board to consider is for the plans going forward, how do we all work together, you know, and focus on some of these priorities with that very much public health strand attached to it. In terms of your additional question around people feeling safe at home, what we have seen in terms of the whole domestic abuse situation is that we've actually seen a decrease in the number of reporting to Police Scotland. And that's not just within your own local authority area, that is right across the whole of Scotland. So I suppose at the moment that presents us with an issue in terms of, you know, is that people are still not able to report to us, you know, because of circumstances, because they're still working from home, etc. And it's something that we very much have a focus on in terms of how we reach out to potential victims, you know, get them access to support services. We very much continue to promote our domestic abuse disclosure scheme. We have done training to, you know, for instance, housing officers, etc., who may be able to pick up, you know, potential signals of domestic abuse. So we are looking at other ways of I suppose, victims being able to access help, and that is very much a focus. And I think that's just a kind of quick summary of where we're at just now. So I don't know if there's any questions on that.
That's really useful. Thanks for that, both Michelle and Donna. I think again, bring it back to where we are as a community planning partnership. It's important to note that, you know, you mentioned there, Donna, about connecting people with the best agency, but actually the reality is a lot of individuals coming to your attention are probably coming for complex needs, and there's a number of agencies that they have to be referred to, and not just one single point. And I think that's the benefit of the community planning partnership. Also, you mentioned around working with housing officers for domestic abuse reporting, and that's a great step at how, you know, again, what other partners do we have? Where are those front door services? Where are the people that are interacting with our residents who can be aware and to be report and to help people link into the appropriate supports? So I think working with housing is a great example of good work partnership working, and one that we can hopefully think about repeating in other services as well. Caroline, I'll bring you in and then we'll try and bring this one to a close because we've still got another discussion to be had. Caroline?
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, Donna. It was really just to build on what Donna was saying, because when we met with Donna last week, she also brought along John Dawson, who has been seconded from Glasgow City Council, if I'm right, Donna, into the police. And you know, part of what John's role will be looking at is how that public health approach can be built in. So I think there's maybe some interesting opportunities there to link in with the work that John is doing, and some of the things we talked about were you know, that public health approach possibly in some of our locality planning areas, and that's something that Glasgow are looking at. He also talked about applying a service design approach as well, which, just for the very points that you said, quite often these are multi-agency, these can be quite complex pathways, and how do we sort of simplify and streamline that? So I thought it was quite interesting that, you know, police have a secondee in from Glasgow City Council, and that's very much what he's looking at, and how partnership working can support that. So he was very kind of willing as well to sort of share with us in terms of the work that Glasgow are doing around that.
Thanks, Caroline. Sorry, David, did I miss your hand going up there? Just bring this in as the last comment.
I just put it up there, that's fine. Just from a fire and rescue perspective, probably reflecting back to the start of the pandemic, you're right in the sense that people were obviously at home a lot more. We saw a rise in accidental dwelling fires, not just in East Renfrewshire but across the country, and we had the national Make the Call campaign, where people were referring in people that had specific characteristics. We saw our unwanted fire alarm signals going down because a lot of the non-domestic environment had closed, and it made us look at our response model to these types of incidents so that we weren't exposing our staff to unnecessary risk. And that's feeding into the new national Ufas consultation, which will be presented at Cabinet shortly, and it's a 12-week national consultation. I think from a mental health perspective, not just in terms of their own staff, but looking out into the communities, it became a national topic quite rightly during the pandemic about isolation and about loneliness. But the reality was, and I reflected on this from our perspective, that the people that we need to reach in our communities to provide that support, this is their reality. Pre-pandemic, during the pandemic and post-pandemic, if anything, it's probably been exacerbated in some cases. So it's really important, and we might actually have a better picture of who some of these people are, ironically, now that we've had the pandemic, that they've maybe come forward for support from a variety of partners. So I think moving forward, when we look at fires and people that are significantly affected by fire or unfortunately die as a result of fire, there is a number of contributory factors that makes them more vulnerable. So fire and rescue usually come in when the fire has happened, and they will sit down with partners and have a case conference. But in reality, it tells us what we already know, that they will have a number of contributory factors such as social isolation, mobility issues, you know, a smoker, a chaotic lifestyle. So what I want to do is move fire and rescue back 12 months in that person's life, at 6 months, 18 months, at the point at which we can make a difference with partners to stop that slide, to stop that movement into these contributory factors resulting in a fire. So there's a lot of opportunities for us moving forward. Some of our staff are being trained in distress brief intervention. As we speak, we have the first fire and rescue mental health support group, which has been running now for about 18 months. That's the first one in Scotland, and it's based in our area. So a lot of positive work. We will have a new youth engagement officer starting hopefully within the next month or two. They'll be part of the community action team, but I'm going to task them specifically with a remit of youth engagement. So a lot of positive stuff for us. But yeah, in much the same ways as colleagues in police, we saw a pattern of activity and demand that you would have expected given all the factors that I've just laid out.
Thanks for that, David. That's really useful. And actually that sort of goes back to, it's a point from the first discussion as well, was we're getting a better picture about who people are, you know, having more information, and actually that feeds us in quite nicely to have an understanding then about our planning for the future. which Jamie's going to move us on to next. So if I can hand back to you, Councillor Buchanan, just to finish this item and to pass on to Jamie, thank you.
Sure, thanks very much, Claire. I know that there was a question I noticed there in the chat in relation to their water safety in East Wren. I know that there has been some tragics, and I think Wendy has raised that issue. There have been tragedies across Scotland and elsewhere, obviously during the warm weather period, and I know that our services, both fire and police, and I know that ourselves as a council have put messages out advising people about the safety around open water. We have a lot of areas of open water in East Renfrewshire, and I know that those messages have gone out, but perhaps either David or our police colleagues could comment on that. I don't know if there have been any particular cause or instance that they've been called to.
We did, still on coffee drinking mode there, apologies. We did have a number of large gatherings around Pickettlaw, around Barhead Dams, and you quite rightly said, Councillor, that we did some joint media with our partners and the local authority. And yeah, it was a really tragic summer for emergency services and for Scotland in general around water safety, and it's a very important topic for us at the moment. But again, it's that whole youth engagement piece, because we have seen in general terms that these gatherings have been gatherings of youth, so it's important to give them the right tools and information around drowning safety, around CPR, etc. And when we have anywhere that has businesses round about, we've started a partnership, Eastern Bartonshire, who are going to pass the tools on to us as a partnership approach to water safety. So any businesses or anything that's in and around or near water, we give them the same input so that they can support any safety messaging, whether that's a physical resource or whether it's just the skills and knowledge of the people that are there.
Okay, thanks very much for that, David. Hopefully that answers your question, Wendy. Okay, as Chris said, obviously we've had a reasonable... Sorry,
hey,
you went in, Wendy. Oh, Gordon.
My name's not Wendy, not that I know of anyway. Gordon, yep, Gordon.
On you go, yeah, on you go, Gordon. I was referring to Wendy's comment. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to see that. On you go, Gordon.
I didn't want to interrupt. Okay. Yeah, just in terms of this water safety and the tragedies that have been happening, I have been in communication with education and leisure to an extent in terms of our youngsters getting swimming lessons, etc. I know there is, albeit a very small proportion, but it's still an important proportion of youngsters who are not getting swimming lessons, and I think I've made it clear in the communications that I've had about the life-saving nature of it and how it could have made a huge difference to those people that were affected over the summer. And just from what I can understand, we do not keep a tally of those youngsters who do not take part in swimming lessons, and I wonder if it's something we should be looking at. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. I think that's something that perhaps between ourselves, education and our culture and leisure services could perhaps have a look at and see if there's a way of trying to track that and indeed encourage, obviously, the water safety aspect in swimming lessons. But I think it's something that they could maybe take forward in relation to that. Okay, if there are no further comments, colleagues, can I then ask the board to approve the Fairer East Wren plan, our transitional plans for 2021-2022? Okay, that's nods, so happy to approve that. If we then move on to item 6 on our agenda, and again, the priorities for 2022 and beyond, and I'll hand over to Jamie, who is going to take us through this next segment. Jamie.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Buchanan. Good morning, everyone. I realise it's been already quite a full discussion and a really positive and insightful one. I'm now going to maybe just ask us to kind of shift our focus and maybe move the kind of horizon that we're looking at a little bit now ahead. So this is really the kind of the kind of final major sort of discussion point for this morning. So it's maybe just worth noting that this is an interesting board meeting, and it's a joint meeting with the PAR, and actually it's an opportunity for the leadership across the community planning partnership really to come together. And at this very early stage in looking ahead for our further plans, it's a real opportunity to try and start to think for the first time in a long time where we've been reacting to things in front of us. It's really an opportunity for us to maybe pivot and start to think about what we might want to, or what we expect we might want to be trying to achieve over the next few years. And I don't imagine we've had too many opportunities to do that over the course of certainly the last 18 months. We have though had some previous discussions with community planning partners in September, and again in March there was 2 workshops, and again there was a really rich quality discussion about action planning around the short to medium term, and really we now need to think about those kind of 5 big outcomes that Claire articulated earlier, but also some of the themes that we're seeing and that have already been touched on this morning that are really going to be pivotal to our response to COVID, and try and figure out, do these things overlap? Do we maybe really need to shift our priorities? Are things that are important still important, but maybe not as critical for a strategic focus if we're going to kind of narrow and try and think about what do we need to be doing to make a difference over the coming years. So we need to maybe just have a wee think about some of those kind of big questions, and recognise that really what I'm kind of talking about now is maybe again less of that reaction, more of the marathon, not a sprint piece, and that can seem daunting when we've just went through an exhausting period of reaction and response and spinning up new services that didn't exist before. But also maybe asking ourselves, again, where are the opportunities for prevention? What do we think the preventative activity as a partnership we might need to start to think about going forward? And I do think the kernels of that are very much coming through in the discussion so far, and I'll kind of recap what I think we've got to with that. But also where you as an individual leader within your own organisation, things are different now for the way that you're running your services. I've no doubt about that. So does that change the way you think about the service provision within East Renfrewshire? Does it change how you think your service is positioned within East Renfrewshire and the challenges that we face locally? And also if we think about the joint ways of working, so we've worked together closer than ever before, a deeper, more trusting partnership in many different ways. How do we take that depth of joint working into our future strategic planning? So I don't think we're starting with a blank sheet of paper by any means here, and I think so far we've seen maybe broadly sort of 3 themes emerge, and I'll just articulate quickly what I think those are. So we've seen community wellbeing, and by that we mean mental health and well-being of residents, community involvement, kind of resilience, and community safety kind of issues, as we've just touched on there, with people's feelings of safety, well-being, and so on. Then we've got community connectivity, and that's in probably 2 very big but very different ways. One of them is about digital connections and the amazing work that's come through Connecting Scotland, both locally and nationally, with the devices and the support for people to use those devices, but also the physical connections via transport. And we know that in a sort of building back in terms of economics, that transport and social connections and well-being, the physical transport piece is going to be critical. So, again, what do we think that means locally? And then the third theme is maybe around something around community wealth building, looking at employment support for businesses, community benefits, the city region planning and capital projects, and the new food kind of initiatives that have spun up to support people who are vulnerable. So we think at the moment those are roughly the kind of 3 buckets, if you like, of kind of new themes that are coming through. And the question is, how well do those triangulate with our previous 5 themes? Do they replace any of that? What do we think around that? And we're really keen at this point, before we start the substance of the planning, that you as our community planning partnership leaders have a sense of or get the opportunity to kind of shape our early thinking and direction round about that. But equally, we need to recognise the importance of the community piece in this as well. And we are undertaking a significant piece of engagement community research that is about understanding the impact that the pandemic has had and what's important for local people. So again, that's touching on what I think Lorraine was talking about earlier around just the needs of local people, and what might have been important from a previous piece of engagement a few years ago may not be as relevant to people. Their priorities may have shifted. So we're hoping that that research, which will start to give us an insight towards the end of the calendar year, will give us a picture of the more the kind of current landscape around socioeconomic disadvantage and priorities for people, and help inform any future planning. So that's really kind of what we're hoping this final discussion can be about. What do you think the future themes might be for the community planning partnerships, and how well do those sit with the priorities that we've previously had? So I'd kind of like to open it up if anyone's got any particular thoughts and views around that. Have I stunned you all into silence there?
Jamie, maybe you could put the 3 themes back up, or Claire, whoever's got control, the 3 themes that come out of the previous PAR meetings, because we've not really got a blank sheet. There's a sort of opportunity there to build on those 3 themes of community wellbeing, connectivity and wealth building. So those themes come up out of, those who are on the PAR will know that those 3 themes come out of discussion. So I guess it's, how do we want, are these the right themes going forward? Are there different ones? Or is this a good basis? Maybe if nobody's coming in, Jamie, it might be worth, if Donna's there. Donna, you started a discussion on the police and the public health approach. I wondered if that really fitted well into the community wellbeing, because in the past we'd have police and community safety, but it's actually, that approach is more about community wellbeing, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree. Lorraine, it is very much about community wellbeing, and as I say, when we look back on what we've all faced in the last 18 months or so, and we see it as very much a wellbeing issue, so I think it would fit in very well here in terms of tackling those kind of underlying issues, similar to what our colleague in the fire service said about, you know, if we'd have been able to rewind back and before they got to that critical point, you know, and maybe been able to work with them in terms of tackling some of those underlying issues before it came, you know, to us as a frontline response issue. So I think it very much lies in here in terms of our work around our adult mental health, our work around, you know, tackling drug deaths, poverty, etc. And I think that was the whole reason why we had presented that to yourselves last week, to say, like, going forward, I think this is something that we should maybe consider incorporating.
That's great. Thanks, Donna. I've noticed there's a few hands come up now, so I'll maybe bring in just some more comments. Anne-Marie, would you like to come in?
Hi, everybody. Jamie, I would just like to say how pleased I am to see that each of those 3 topics have all got community as the first word. I think for the community, that's really a good way forward. So really just that comment.
Great. No, thanks for that. And you're right. It's the whole point of this is about, you know, the outcomes for our communities. So no, that's definitely right. Michael, I'm not sure which order people put their hands up in, just the way that they come up. But Michael McCarry, do you want to come in on a point?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Yeah, just really speaking about the theme of community wealth building. So I think this would be integral to obviously any work the partnership are doing in terms of moving forward and help our response to COVID, but also linking in with employability, child poverty, etc. as well. I think in terms of community wealth building, I think probably, you know, expanding on what you said, you know, it's quite all-encompassing in what we're planning to do. So it all relates to how we as a council work with ourselves, but also our partners, and then the goods that we buy, people we employ, the assets we own, but also what powers we have that can bring about change to maximise local economic opportunities within East Rand. So I think, you know, in terms of the work around employability, support the businesses, but also child poverty as well. under the banner of community wealth building will be an integral part moving forward.
Great. No, thanks, Michael. That's really helpful. James, do you want to come in on?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I think the three areas, as everyone is saying, they reflect well back into the 5, but kind of reprioritising them around those particular areas, I think, is the right thing to do. I wonder if there is something in the context of, I guess, COP26 coming at us thick and fast, but the kind of acceleration of our impact on the environment and the actions that we need to take. There's lots wrapped up in those 3 pieces. So I guess it's been more explicit about what that looks like, but maybe there's something about community sustainability that sits alongside those 3 pieces that brings together, I guess, a real way to demonstrate how the community contributes as well as supported to contribute into that space. But that doesn't forego, I think, once you see the detail below it, if we're using the 5 as guiding principles, there is a lot in there to celebrate as a key going forward. And I maybe just one pick up on the comment that Mark made earlier on. There's a huge amount of work that we do collectively around the use of data, which has to continue, but we need to make sure we've got the right data. So longer term research evaluation, whether that's national or local, to understand what that end of the 3-year plan might look like for us, in particular around the workforce and businesses and how they operate. So it brings back to the fore, I guess, digital skills. But we can't expect our businesses to continue to operate in the same way they're doing. So different. So that would be my only plea, that the data set becomes enriched and the partnership use that in longer term plan.
No, thank you. That's all really helpful, and I think you're right on the environmental impact. But again, that could become a very big piece of work in its own right. So I think as a partnership, we need to think carefully about what the particular challenges that we would want to tackle together, and thinking about how that could impact on that you're right, that sustainability piece or the resilience of our local communities. So no, thanks for that. Stephen and then Wendy.
Michael and James have really just stolen my thunder, to be 100% honest. I was just going to say, I think community wealth building encompasses probably most of what you have under fairer East Wren, the concept of making financial power work for local places, fair employment, progressive procurement of goods and services, and basically how do we use the assets we've got for socially productive use. So I think community wealth building fits quite nicely there. The only other thing I was going to add was actually about the concept of net zero. That's going to have a huge impact on our communities. I don't think our communities, the general population, fully understand the impact of net zero as a national target. It's going to impact on how everybody heats their house pretty much in East Renfrewshire. It's going to impact on how we all move about, and so I think perhaps it's worth having, if you're rejigging the plan for 2022, it's worth having the concept of net zero as perhaps a cross-cutting theme, because it can sit across community wealth building and what other and the 2 other areas as well. So it's up to yourself how you want to cut the pie, but that's essentially what I was going to say.
Okay. No, thanks for that, and that is a good point to make. I think, the implications of this aren't necessarily well understood yet publicly. So, no, thanks for that. Wendy, do you want to come in?
Yeah, it's just really a general point on the list of all the activities, which is great to see so much is happening. But I suppose it's a plea that as we go forward, we make sure we keep the connection on the why we're doing these activities and what's the outcome they're trying to achieve. Because I think it's often really easy to lose track of all of that and forget, oh, why is it we're doing that again? But to keep that connection with the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for communities really at the forefront in our sites. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for that. No, that's incredibly important. Okay, I'm aware that it's been a full discussion so far, and I don't want to pull it out any longer than it needs to be. But I'm just wondering, is there anything that anyone feels that we've missed that we should be giving consideration to at this point? Anything that we've not touched on that is going to be important in this space? Claire, sorry.
So Gordon Wallace.
Yep, go ahead, Councillor Wallace.
Sorry, I feel I'm interrupting again. Did you call in Claire first?
No, go ahead. We can call Claire in next.
Yeah. Just to say, maybe I've missed something. It's difficult when you're just on the phone, just trying to listen to what's going on. But have we mentioned employment and wealth creation at all? Have we?
Yeah. That's part of the first theme that we talked about. And yeah.
So it's just to come back in that I think some of the significant changes we've seen, definitely over the last 18 months, is there has been a sort of reappraisal by everybody as to what they really want out of life and what their priorities are. And it's certainly had an impact on a huge number of businesses, not least hospitality, as you know. And there's been a reappraisal of thinking, well, I don't want to be working in a kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday or a Sunday morning when all my pals are out partying and all the rest of it. I know this sounds a kind of simplicity, but one of the great benefits or opportunities that has come out of this is there's been a reappraisal by employers as to what the real value of employing people within hospitality and other industries, low-paid industries such as food, is a classic example in which the opportunities out there for youngsters are absolutely superb now. And I would suggest to you, and I'm no expert, is that one of the core things about mental health and well-being is purpose and purpose in life. And I think the more that we can show that these opportunities, and you know, I know you've mentioned about minimum wage, or sorry, not minimum wage, living wage. Is I think we're going to find very soon that the concept of living wage will be very much a part of these businesses in the sense that they're not going to be able to recruit unless they do have the living wage. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, and I would just like to think, I know we do it, and I know we do it with our training, apprenticeship training, etc., is just to keep a push on just to show the major positives that is in hospitality. And I think we have to, the reason I'm mentioning it is that hospitality is one of the core industries in East Renfrewshire, all our cafes, restaurants, etc., that contribute so much to business life. So just making the comment, let's keep pushing that and keep pushing the opportunities for our youngsters. And I think that would contribute greatly to the wealth of small communities and to the general mental health of our youngsters. Thank you.
No, thanks for that, Councillor Wallace. Okay. Got a few people, so we'll obviously ask people just to come in and if they can just kind of make their main point. So Claire, do you want to quickly come in on something?
I didn't want to come in on my own behalf, but I noticed there was a comment in the chat from John Binning around transport, which I thought was really relevant to bring in this discussion around community connectivity.
Okay, thanks for that, Claire. John, do you want to come in on that?
Hi, thanks very much. Yeah, huge challenges for transport as a consequence of COVID, and you know, there's issues in terms of the patronage levels had kind of gone through the floor, but they're now back up to around 50%. But there's many more people using cars. Some senses higher than it was before COVID. And I know Jamie mentioned net zero, and we have got that national commitment to reduce car mileage by 20% by 2030. So that's a huge challenge. COVID's had that massive impact on transport. There's been approximately £1 billion of funding from the Scottish Government to support the transport network, but we're seeing more people working from home, so we will need a new, more flexible model for transport going forward. There are positives. I should stress we'll see free bus travel for under 22s from January next year, which I think is positive in terms of things like education, access to education, employment, etc., etc. SPT has reintroduced the MyBus service to support transport for vulnerable people, and it's good to see Anne-Marie here today. We're continuing support for community transport as well. More nationally, we've got the Transport Scotland Act, which is promoting more enhanced partnership working between bus operators and local authorities. That's positive. The importance of bus has been recognised by the Scottish Government through a £500 million investment package in bus priority, which will kick in over the next 5 years. We've seen the City Regions Metro proposal being included in Transport Scotland's forward plans. And East Renfrewshire, I know that you've been beginning to take forward again the Transport Delivery Plan, which is very positive, and that builds on the 2 earlier studies that were conducted on local transport links and community transport. SPT has been working on its new regional transport strategy and working closely with the council on that. We've had excellent responses from recent engagement, and many of the issues around connectivity that have been mentioned today are included in that. And we're looking specifically at the moment through that regional transport strategy at the issue of affordability. So huge challenges, but a lot of positives as well to build on. Thank you.
Okay, no, thanks, John. I think that's a really good overview of the range of work that's going on at the moment as well. And obviously transport has been a key issue for us locally now for some time. So I think it will remain a critical issue for us as part of any future planning. Okay, we've got Ruth and then Nathan.
Thank you. I was just going to come out and say that quite a lot of the comments have already kind of been made in terms of the 3 buckets, as you described them, that we've got, actually cover quite a lot of what we've all been talking about, and they're quite wide. And sharing all of the data that we're all doing. I think one of the things that I would like to point out is there's a lot of consultation and engagement going on at the moment. There's various national consultations coming out that are incredibly important, as well as our own local engagements that we're having to do. What I would say is that I think it's really important that we add in something about the way in which we're going to be communicating. And making sure that when we are doing all of this, that actually our communication that goes out to the public is very clear about what it is that we're communicating about, what's in the discussion, what are we actually able to do something about, and what are the things that really are not within our gift to change, but actually what we want to talk about is how we make them the best use of it locally. But just making sure that we are using the engagement that we already have, rather than going out and asking all of the same questions to all of the same people, but at the same time communicating that we've done this. So I know there's a lot of engagement that has been done, pre-pandemic that may well be out of date, may well not be as relevant now as people's priorities change and their lives have changed. But throughout the pandemic, there has also been quite a lot of engagement going on in terms of those that we've had contact with, the shielders that have been involved in having almost weekly, if not daily, contact with members of the council staff. So it's important that we communicate that actually we're not starting from ground zero. We have done a lot of work, and that's what people have been telling us in our local area, and making sure that that's clearly communicated out and doesn't get lost in translation.
No, great point, Ruth. And actually, again, that's been part of the thinking around the joint humanitarian work that we did, and the piece of work that's out at the moment, and doing that on a partnership basis as well. So no, your point's very well made. Nathan.
Hi, I'm new in, so excuse anything I say that comes out as ridiculous or daft. But look, I just wanted to say that I think West College Scotland is very aligned with those themes, and that increased work with the public and private sector, both in terms of COVID recovery and the build to a fair and sustainable future. Because obviously, key to us is delivering that FE provision that's fit for purpose to fill those jobs, to create that wealth, to create that connectivity through sort of digital inclusion with our student body and things like that. And I guess for me, that sharing of the analytics, or both not just the analytics themselves, but the evaluation of those analytics that we can all feed into this will be incredibly insightful for us. But also that understanding back where we can add value into all of you, I think will be absolutely key, not least because we have a kind of a fairly large student body from East Renfrewshire of all ages, that we can kind of feedback learnings in as well. So it's just to kind of, I suppose it's an open invitation to everybody here is to get in touch, because if there's any way that I think the West College can support these themes within your individual responsibilities, and then please do let me know.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, I think I'm not seeing any more hands up at the moment, so I think that again has been a really good discussion. I think it's reinforced that those three kind of themes definitely seem to be ones that we can coalesce around, and we definitely think there's scope for further development. We need to think about climate piece, the net zero agenda, and also just that broader economic support piece around local businesses and local communities as well. So we seem to be broadly on the right track. That is what I'm taking out of the discussion, broad support for the approach that we've outlined. And really what we'll begin to do now is take that forward and refine our understanding of that, so that we are focused on a shared sort of data-informed understanding of local needs and priorities, and that we can focus on the right outcomes for communities within East Renfrewshire. So we've got shared objectives round about that. So on that basis, I will hand back to the leader and ask him just to take us through the remainder of the agenda.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jamie. And I think again that's been another useful discussion, touching on the topics that are close to us all in terms of achieving that ability of fairness and ensuring that we try and work over the next few years of delivering that. And we know that that's much easier said than done. We know some of the difficulties that we will face doing that. And we touched on the real living wage, for example, and how important that can be, not just for our local economy, but for those who deserve to be paid the proper rate for the job. And that's going to be vital going forward. The other aspects of it, we already see some of the things that we've known that have worked, some changes over the last 18 months to the benefit system. The additional payments that have been in place have been a godsend in many respects to the people who are the most vulnerable in our society. And yet, unfortunately, that would now appear to be being withdrawn. But that has been vital going forward. And that hasn't just supported those individuals and those families, that's supported local businesses as well, because that money tends to be recycled locally. And it's those issues that I think that will give us some of the biggest headaches. It's about how we manage to highlight that and how we manage to take that forward. We've touched on climate change and the impact that that's going to have over the next few years and how we tackle that. And again, yesterday on Friday at COSLA Leaders Meeting, I'd actually put forward, I was working on a motion which looked, because at the moment for COP26, local government, both in Scotland and across the UK, hasn't been given an appropriate platform in order to take some of these issues forward. Now, our colleagues from around Europe and around the globe will be in attendance. There will be a local authority day, but the UK Cabinet Office hasn't given UK local government a platform to actually take forward some of the issues that we know need to be addressed at a local level. And that's been extremely disappointing, but we have unanimous support, thankfully, from all parties at COSLA to take that forward and to challenge that, because again, it's an area moving forward that's going to be vital in the next few years as to where we end up and how we manage to achieve that community wealth building, how we manage to achieve that fairness. So thanks everyone for highlighting a number of those issues and taking that forward. On those notes then, I'll be happy that our board is asked to note the timeline for renewing our fairer East Rend plans over the period 2022 to 2025, and ask you to note the thematic framework and agree the relevant thematic groups work to develop the new fairer East Rend plans. Are we happy with that paper, colleagues? Thank you. That only leaves us then with any other competent business. Is there anyone else got any further comments that they wish to raise? No, thank you. On that note then, I can draw the meeting to a close. Can I first of all thank you all and your respective organisations for the work over the last 18 months. As we highlighted initially at the beginning, the amount of work that's been done for the residents across the area has been absolutely tremendous. The partnership working has been first class, and although it was good beforehand, I think it was highlighted how effective it has been in recent years during the pandemic, and that certainly stood us in very good stead moving into and dealing with the pandemic. And I know, as has been mentioned, not every area were in similar circumstances, and so I thank you all for the work that we had done prior to the pandemic, which certainly stood us in good stead. Again, the support goes out to all of you for today, for the work that you've done. That has been vital in getting us here. And thank you all for your contributions today, because I think it's quite clear that that support, that partnership working can continue and will continue to help deliver for all of our residents. So thank you very much, colleagues, much appreciated. And in terms of our next meeting, I don't have a date yet. I think we'll get that out to you as soon as possible. Hopefully, it will not be 2 years down the line, but we will get that resolved and get dates out to you appropriately. And once again, thank you for today, and thank you for your work in recent months. Thanks all. That closes our meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Thanks, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye all.
Bye, everybody.
Cheerio.